What's going on, everybody? Hope everyone's having a great night. I got a very special guest, one of the greatest offensive linemen to ever come to the University of Miami. Even Coach Erickson said he's the greatest offensive lineman he's ever seen play with his own eyes. 3-time All-Big East selection, University of Miami Hall of Fame inductee, 5-year NFL pro with the Denver Broncos, Casey Jones. Welcome to the Scoop. How you doing tonight, sir?
I'm doing great, Paul. Thanks for having me. And I got to let you know that I'm also, Coach Kough told me that I was awarded the Ultimate Warrior Badass Award for 2 years running when I was at the University of Miami.
Love it.
That's a very special award given to the Ultimate Badass at Miami. And that was two times with Coach Kough.
Especially, you went in a time where you had The Rock. You was on your team.
Sure.
Warren Sapp. I mean, those are some big dudes.
Yeah. Well, Sapp was the dude, right? And Dwayne's like, he's attempting his version of like he's revising history right now on his show. So it's gonna be interesting to see how that works out on Tuesday nights. But he's Sapp was the definitive leader and one of the most talented players I ever played with. But he was the captain of that team in 1994, and he was basically a wrecking ball for that defense, game in and game out.
KC, let's start off with your recruiting story.
Okay.
You played high school football in Midland, Texas.
Yep.
How did you get recruited by the University of Miami? Who was the coach that got in contact with you all the way in Midland, Texas?
Yeah, man, I was fortunate enough. I came from Midland, Texas. Anybody knows anything about West Texas football? It's a unique brand of football. It's a very physical, tough, disciplined form of football that kind of gets the best out of they get blood from a stone out in West Texas, right? So they maximize the talent. I played on offensive line with guys that were bigger than me and guys that were smaller than me, but they all had one thing in common. They were all tough, they were all nasty, and they all wanted to win. And we were trained that way from second grade on. So I came from a foundation of football in West Texas that was, I believe, is second to none. And I got my brother. He paved the way for me. He was a center at Midland Lee. He was all district center, and then his teammate Jake Young was a driving force in my early years. So he was a 2-time All-American at Nebraska, and he would come back and talk to the freshman team, to the junior high teams. And he came back, and I think it was in '89 after Miami had beat the Nebraska in the Orange Bowl.
Okay.
And he came back, and everybody's in awe of Jake Young. At that time, he was 20 feet tall and 400 pounds and just good-looking offensive lineman. But he came back, and one of my friends in the back, Chico, says, "Hey, what happened last night against the Canes?" And I'll never forget it to this day. Jake Young gathered himself and kind of smiled. He said, "Too big, too strong, too fast." And that's what stuck with me. That was my first impression of University of Miami. Right, it was Jake Young, this god that I'd always looked up to, came back from Nebraska after the Orange Bowl and said, the University of Miami is unique. It's different than anything I've ever played against, and that left a lasting impression with me. But I was fortunate enough to play with some great players at Lee. Had great coaching at Lee.
Yeah.
I was technically sound coming out of high school, and was recruited pretty much all over the country. I got a call one day at the house. I picked up the phone, and the call went something like this. I said, "Hello," and at the other end of the line was this voice that said, "Hey, is this Casey Jones?" And I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "This is Ed Ogeron. You ever heard of University of Miami?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "We're going to offer you a football scholarship, plane tickets in the mail. See you when you get here. Bye." And that was my recruiting process. That was it. Basically, that was the whole recruiting process at University of Miami. So, sure enough, a couple weeks later, plane ticket shows up, go to Miami, and the rest is kind of, as you say, history.
That's
so I fell in love with the attitude. I fell in love with the coaches, the system, the history immediately. And it wasn't really a tough decision to leave Texas to go to University of Miami.
Yeah, and speaking of the coaches during your time there, I mean, Rob Shazinski was an analyst.
Yeah. Oh yeah, no, I think he was. he had a suit and tie job before, and he came in. I think he was 94, 95, and came in and started his career. And next thing you know, he's the head coach of the Cleveland Browns. So there was a lot of played there at a very special time, and I don't think what you have until you get a little bit of time and distance between that time and kind of really appreciate what you had. But I played with some incredible players, incredible coaches at an incredible time in history where it was a lot of fun and it was a lot of good football play. I think back to those days. We talked about Warren Sapp, and probably one of the best football players I've ever been around. But Ray Lewis was on that team. My mentor, Kevin Patrick, Darren Crine, Rusty Medeiros, those guys were outstanding. I think those, a lot of guys that are kind of forgotten or kind of swept to the side for bigger names. But you talk about Chuck Pagano, Don Solinger, Art Keogh being on the staff with Butch Davis. It's insane. I mean, when you look back, it's kind of a head scratcher to think that all that came together, and I was there to bear witness to it.
Speaking of, coming to the University of Miami from Midland, Texas, how was that transition from high school football, your freshman year at, I mean, it's the elite of the elite.
Yeah. So I came to University of Miami. They had just beat Nebraska in the Orange Bowl in '91, and we're bound to repeat. So I know I was, one of the reasons, and I wasn't able to articulate this until I heard Rusty Medeiros say it in his Hall of Fame speech when he was inducted in the University of Miami Sports Hall of Fame. And what he said was that, he was highly recruited. He could have gone anywhere. And what he told coaches when he had to turn them down, when he had to call USC, UCLA, Notre Dame, Michigan, all these big time programs, and say he was going to University of Miami, he said he could never live with himself if he backed down from the challenge that is University of Miami. He would always wonder in the back of his mind if he would have been able to compete on a daily basis with those guys at the University of Miami. And I think deep down inside myself, I felt the same way. I could have gone, the easy way for me would have gone to go to Texas A&M or Nebraska or Oklahoma. Those were paths that were already laid and blazed from former athletes from my high school. But there's something unique and different about taking that challenge to go to the University of Miami. It was, the challenge of going to the University of Miami, going far away, going to a distant land, going somewhere that I didn't know anybody.
Yeah.
And then also, they were number one. They were defending champions. So what better place to develop my craft and challenge myself and see if I could do it. So I think a lot of guys still feel that way and take on that challenge to go to the University of Miami.
KC, first year on Green Tree.
Yeah.
Your old line coach is Art Keogh.
Yeah, man.
Just beat Nebraska. Any stories you got, man, as a true freshman?
Man,
trenches.
There's nothing. I played big time high school football, right? We would have 30,000 people. My last high school football game, we played Odessa Permian. They went on to win the state championship that year. We played in Jones Stadium at Texas Tech. 30,000 people in the stands. So this is big time football, right? There's nothing that could have prepared me for what I saw at the University of Miami on that Green Tree field. From the athleticism to the intensity to it was I'll give you an example, right? So the first day of practice, you come in as a class of freshmen, you practice for a few days, and then the upperclassmen come in. And just from the eye test on these guys were bad dudes, right? So one guy that I was going to end up having to block for the next 3 years, Pat Riley, was out just like 6'6", 300 pounds, didn't have an inch, like an ounce of fat on him. Like these are just different type of humanoids, right? First off, and then the speed and intensity in which they practice, and then the attitude, of course, came with it. So the first day of practice, we're lining up for one-on-ones, and we ran a wishbone offense in high school. So when I say wishbone offense, that means a fullback in a 4-point stance, 2 halfbacks, and 2 tight ends. Everybody in 4-point stances. We're running the ball. That's it. So what our practices were, a lot of our practices were one-on-ones. So one-on-one, what's the hardest thing you're going to do in football on the field? Is one-on-one. So if you can win one-on-one, you got a chance. right? So that was their coach. That was my coach's philosophy in Midland, and this is also the philosophy in Miami. However, with Dennis Erickson's offense, we're running out of shotgun and we're running pass blocks, right? So I had to adapt out of a 4-point stance into a 3-point stance and learn how to pass block. Meanwhile, there's these guys that look like they're, something out of a sci-fi novel are coming to attack me, right? So it got serious really quick. So first day of practice, lineup one-on-ones, and Mark Caesar, he was kind of like the resident badass of that defensive line coming back in 1992. And I got lucky and I got him on my first try, snapped the ball one-on-ones, got my hands inside, just like I was taught at Midland Lee.
Right.
And he just kind of set my hips and sat down on him, and he couldn't really move. This frustrated him to where he, started throwing bolos. We started fighting. He ended up trying to kick me he tried to kick me.
Right.
And unfortunately, he missed. But it ended up being a brawl between the offensive line and defensive line, just a melee.
Oh,
right?
wow.
I've never seen anything like that. It was crazy. So they ended up putting the offense, like the rest of the day, they put the offense on one field and the defense on the other field because they knew a fight was just going to break out. This is my first day. First practice. This is the morning practice.
Yeah.
So I'm getting undressed after that first morning practice, and someone calls me over and says, "Hey, Pat Riley wants to talk to you," which is kind of funny already because his name's Pat Riley. But Pat Riley, Pat Riley is from Louisiana, and he's 6'6". He's just mean looking and a bad dude. And he says, "Hey, Rook," he says, "You going to lunch?" I said, "Yeah, I'm going to lunch." He said, "I'm going to stab you at lunch." And I was like, all right. And so at that moment in time, I had to make up my mind whether I was willing to die for the privilege to play at the University of Miami.
Right.
And what I say, I told him I'm going to lunch. Right. That was the defining moment of my, very early on, the first day of practice, where you're challenged at the University of Miami. Are you willing to die? And obviously, being away from it now, he wasn't going to stab me. He's a gentleman and a nice guy. But at the time, I didn't know.
Right.
I didn't know anybody. I showed up the first day of practice. That same practice, the only guy I know, my host, Brad Shirey, broke his femur.
Oh, wow.
in a drill.
Yeah.
That's the only dude I knew in Florida.
Right.
At the University of Miami. That was my only connection to anybody that knew me or was going to take care of me. So I kind of had to figure it out all on my own. But I think that defining moment kind of followed me and kind of set the tone for my career at Miami, that you had to be willing to fight. You had to be willing to do whatever it takes if you're going to be part of that team.
And, you redshirted your freshman year, but you bounced back pretty strong. You started every single game the next season. And you were the youngest center, I think, at Miami to start.
Thank God I redshirted. Thank God. I don't know what these guys are thinking. Some of these guys want to jump out. The transition is a difficult one, right? I had the benefit of being technically sound and knowing I knew how to play football when I got to the University of Miami because of my upbringing in Midland in the Lee program. We learned the same terminology, the same drills, the same offense, same defense from when you're second grade all the way through junior high school into high school, right? So you're ready to play. You know how to play football. You got your 10,000 reps in for your expertise of your position by the time you get on that field, your junior, senior year in high school, right? So I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. What were we just talking about?
No, it's all good. Basically redshirting.
Redshirting. So I felt good, but physically I was not. I wasn't there. I weighed 240 pounds.
Yeah.
Right. But I knew that I was competing at a high level, but I just wasn't strong enough or fast enough. Coach Erickson had agreed to redshirt me, but come Florida State week, guess who's running with the ones?
You are.
I am. And if it wasn't for I tore the ligaments in my thumb in a 9-on-7 drill, I would have lost my red shirt and I would have been facing Marvin Jones, the middle linebacker, Florida State. I would have been weighing 240 pounds in that game. It would have been great, but it would have been a huge challenge. So I'm glad that I got an opportunity to take my time to kind of get my feet wet at Miami, because it's culturally a very different place from Midland, Texas.
Right.
And by the way, after 2 weeks into practice, Hurricane Andrew comes through, right, and just blows up campus. So a very disrupted start to my freshman year. So I was very, very, very happy to do that. But I took the time in the weight room with Coach Roll. Brad Roll was a great strength coach at that time. He's the one that trained me. We did Olympic lifts, and I got strong. I came back. I was a little bit heavier, probably about 255, 260 maybe, coming back. But I had another year under my belt, and that was the biggest difference, coming back to be able to compete for that starting job. And I just knew that all I wanted was an opportunity, and that's all I've ever wanted on the football field. I felt that as a player, if I had an opportunity, I could compete with anybody. And I proved myself right in that spring by earning the first team center position.
Who was your mentor, throughout your time at Miami, KC? Coach Kough was your offensive line coach.
Yeah.
You had so many great, position coaches. You saw the transition between Eric's and Coach Davis. So who did you look up to, coach or player-wise?
So obviously Coach Kough was my coach, but at Miami, and it was there. It was this way when I was there. It was the players owned that team. Like before the games, the coaches got thrown out of the locker room. Right? It was the players that ran that team. And so who I looked up for guidance and for advice the most were a couple individuals. First, it was Kevin Patrick, who was also one of my hosts on my recruiting trip that I ended up getting a fight with on my recruiting trip.
Oh.
Weird. So I didn't, it was kind of a weird relationship from the start, but that guy's a true Cane. Kevin Patrick was a true Cane from Lake Worth, Florida. Tough as nails, great player, smart player, aggressive, nasty, had all the traits that you want in a defensive lineman, especially at the University of Miami. So he took me under his wing and kind of taught me the ins and outs, what to do, what not to do. And he was the one that would pick me up for 2-a-day practices every morning. And he had this red Bronco 2 that he picked me up at in my off-campus house. He'd pick me up every morning, and he'd be playing three non-blondes, What's Going On? So that song was burned into my mind for the rest of my life. Every time I hear that song now, I think about Kevin Patrick. But I know this, man, that I wouldn't have been able to get through my freshman, especially my redshirt freshman year, without him, man. He was a true friend and a true Cane. And then later on in my freshman season, I roomed with Mario Cristobal. And he was also a guy that I had kind of had some run-ins with on the practice field, because I was a freshman. I didn't really know how the etiquette of practice, maybe going a little too hard. Right. I had this weird thumb cast that I jabbed people with. So Mario took exception to that. We kind of got into a little bit of a fisticuffs on the practice field. And then the next week, the room assignments came out for the Sugar Bowl, and I was rooming with Mario Cristobal. And I just thought, oh man, Mario's going to beat my ass this whole week, but he didn't, man. He took me under his wing as well. And he truly mentored me, and he was a coach after that and really helped me on, the training side, the mental aspect of the game, the nutritional side of your training regimen, and was also a true friend. My last year, I lived with Mario's mom, Clara Cristobal, at their house off of Ludlam. And I'll always be grateful for their family and what they did for me. So the two mentors for me were Kevin Patrick and certainly Mario Cristobal.
It's interesting how, you brought up two players, for example, Kevin Patrick, Mario Cristobal, how they took you under their wing.
Yeah.
They showed you tough love at first, and then how we do things. And I think that's what kind of transitions to a successful program as a whole.
Yeah, you have to have that. Who are the ambassadors of the culture, right? Who tells the young guys how to act and what's expected of them? If you don't have that, they just make it up on their own. And then it's basically they just take their culture from their high school or their upbringing. And that's not really what the University of Miami is about. They have a specific culture there and a specific expectation that should never, ever be lost. And I think that's why, not to get too far into it, but I think you lose some of the chronological connectivity of the University of Miami. So when Coach Kough left that program, he was the only guy that had 5 national. He had all 5 national championship rings, right? He was the guy. He could tell you stories about Kenny Dorsey. He could tell you stories about Bertie Kosar. He could tell you stories about Jerome Brown. He could tell you stories about Warren Sapp, right? And he could tell you what was the common thread with all of those guys and how they trained and how they practiced, how they carried themselves, right? And I think that's something that may have been lost along the way at the University of Miami.
Very well said. You're not going to hear it anywhere better than a former player who lived through some of the glory days at the University of Miami. KC, you saw a very special transition during your time at Miami. Coach Erickson takes off to the NFL.
Yeah.
Butch Davis, Dallas Cowboys.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
What was the first impression of Coach Davis, from you guys? You see this guy. I mean, I didn't live it, but what people tell me was, he basically was his first time being a head coach. He kind of was like a deer in headlights.
Yeah, well, no, I wouldn't say that. I think that he certainly had what he wanted. His expectations were mapped out from day one. He had the design on that program. He was proud, and I don't think there was anybody that wanted that job more than Butch Davis. Ooh. And he had the pedigree. He was a Jimmy Johnson guy. He won Super Bowls as a defensive line coach at the Dallas Cowboys, and he was well deserving. But from my experience, anybody that's ever been a first-time head coach certainly struggles. And the difference between Dennis Erickson was a player's coach, right? Dennis Erickson, we would practice hard, we would play hard, but he just wanted to make sure that we were ready to play on Saturday. So he would get everybody ready for that day. That was the specific day. With Butch Davis, you got to be ready on Monday. You got to be ready on Tuesday. You got to be ready on Sunday in the off season. You got to be ready every day, right? And so I think that was the part of his learning process, was how to get guys to buy into his program, to buy into his design on what we should be doing, how should we be acting on and off the field. It felt at times punitive the way we would practice, because it was Tuesday blitz drill would be like a bloodbath, man. It would be ones on ones. And talk about a guy that we go into UCLA, his first game as head coach, we have a 2-hour pregame, wow. At the Rose Bowl. And it's like, man, when do we get a break, coach? But that was his way. And that was his way of, he had to come in pretty hard, man. There were some big personalities on all those teams. We had a wild spirit, so he had to come in hard.
Okay.
Did it benefit those teams in maybe 95, 96? No, but it sure as hell benefited those teams in 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
And the way he did it, there's no one can deny the impact that Butch Davis had on that football program. Did he win a national championship? No, but he sure did get all the pieces together and got that attitude right. And there was a time where I left not really liking, enjoying my relationship with Butch Davis. And I've said it to him as well. We didn't see eye to eye. We didn't see eye to eye on practice, on injuries, on certain things on and off the field. We didn't see eye to eye. And I had a certain amount of resentment towards Butch Davis after I left. There was a time where I thought if I ever bumped into him in a bar, I'd take his job, right? Wow. Yeah. But time heals all wounds, and I'm proud to say that a couple years ago I went to FIU practice and I made amends with Coach Davis. I told him I loved him. I know he did the best he can. I know he loved us. And he did the very best for us. But as a first-time head coach, mistakes are made, and it's tough. How else do you learn as a first-time head coach except by making mistakes? Right,
exactly. Especially
that's a common thread with. You talk about all the first-time head coaches at the University of Miami.
Yeah.
How did they learn? They learn through making mistakes. They learn through making mistakes, and it's not perfect right off the shoot. It's not perfect, but in the end, if these guys are, if they're genuine and they love the kids like they say they do, and they care for their kids, they're going to have success.
Speaking of that, season under Butch Davis. 1995, I believe you guys were put on sanctions by the NCAA. You can't go to a bowl game that
Yeah.
year. As a team, what's the morale? Because if you can't get a reward at the end of the season for all your hard work, I mean, I'm
it sucks,
sure,
man.
it's tough.
It sucks. So we were coming off the year before that '94 season. We were playing Nebraska, and in the Orange Bowl, we win that game. We have a share of the national championship, right? So we're coming off of a national championship contending season to a season where we get beat 33-9 against or 8 against UCLA to open the game, and then I think we went on a run there where we get beat by Virginia Tech, right before we right the ship, and these are losses that were at the time unforgivable, right? You don't lose to Virginia Tech. You don't fly across the country, although that's a long road game, but you don't lose to a Pac-10 team at the time. You don't lose to UCLA. But they had great players too. They had Jonathan Ogden and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, and they had all those guys are on scholarship too. But at the time, the attitude was you don't do that. And so it was a dark period for the University of Miami, and we didn't really know how to really react. I went down with an injury against Rutgers in a dogfight against Rutgers in the Orange Bowl, and I missed the second half of that season.
Yeah,
and and on top of that, so we're a 9-3 team, and we have a chance to go to the Orange Bowl, probably play Nebraska or play Notre Dame. And the NCAA comes down with sanctions, and what does the University of Miami do? That we roll over, and we give up the bowl game against Notre Dame in the Orange Bowl that year. So it was a low. So if you're talking about like the hero's journey of my career, that's the abyss. I was coming off an injury, and didn't have a good relationship with my head coach. I was benched that year. I mean, it was a shit year. I mean, it was probably the toughest year of my career at the University of Miami. And I think a lot of guys felt that way because you go to the University of Miami to compete for national championships and playing big time games. And not only playing big time games, but win big time games.
Yeah.
And we didn't feel like we were in a position to do that in that year.
Speaking of, kind of your most frustrating moment at Miami, going back and forth with Coach Davis, not being able to play in a bowl game against Notre Dame. What was your most memorable moment, Casey?
Oh, shit, man. I got a lot of them. I mean, that one, Pat Riley told me he's going to stab me. That's one of them. So here's another one, man, and you'll love this one. This is a story I told on Michael Barrow's podcast a few months ago, but it's kind of set the tone, I think, between that freshman camp really set the tone for the rest of my career. But as I mentioned, Ed Ogeron recruited me to the University of Miami.
Yeah,
he was a D-line coach, and Arquillo was the assistant offensive line coach. And those two guys are just by nature very competitive. So if you can imagine at practice, these guys are just all day long they're yelling at each other. They're pushing on each other. They're trying to get us ready. They're trying to create chaos, and they're trying to get us to raise our level a little bit emotionally at practice. And Dennis Erickson had this. He had this cool. I mean, Coach Erickson was the coolest, man. Like when I look back, Coach Erickson, he did things. Everything was calculated. He knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to get everybody to compete at the highest level possible, and that included his coaches, right? So when we would go out to stretch at Green Tree Field, there used to be this 50-yard patch of artificial turf that we'd stretch on, that we'd break, and we go to practice. But it would be kind of an odd configuration where the offense would line up on one side, facing, I guess that would be north, and the defense would be facing opposite us, facing us on the north side. So we're just face to face in stretching lines.
Right.
And I thought, which is kind of an odd way to do it, but whatever. I'm a freshman. I don't know anything anyway, so I didn't really think much of it. But at the end of every stretch before practice, he'd call up two people. He'd say, Michael Barrow, Mario Cristobal on the line. And these guys would get on the line. They'd just be like a one-on-one. Boom, 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 right? And it would just go on for sometimes it'd go on for 5 or 6 seconds. Other times it'd go on for maybe a minute or so, like where these guys would figure it out. It'd be
Yeah.
just basically like a street fight. So and he would use this to end any squabbles, or more importantly, man, like just to get everybody like hyped up, like just get everybody excited to practice. Because like when you see that, like your two best players, your captains being called out, and they got to lay it on the line to start a practice, it's pretty serious, man. You raise your level, right? And so this was like probably a week into camp, and everybody's kind of dragging a little bit. Coach Kough and Ogeron are barking at each other all practice long. Who does he call up? Ed Ogeron, Kough on the line.
Oh.
so Ed Ogeron comes with big barrel chest. Oh, come on now. I played Nickel State. Like this guy. And here's Kough, turns his cap back around. All right, I got this. Smile. He's got this like shit-eating grin on. And so they lined up, and Coach Kough fires off at him, blasts Ogeron, gets his hands inside, and just dumps him on the ground. Everybody goes crazy. Everybody goes nuts. Still to this day, it's the best one-on-one rep I've ever seen. Like just textbook. And then it's just like that kind of sets the tone, not only for practice, not only for that week, but for the whole season and my entire career. Because that's what my University of Miami is all about, man.
Yeah.
It's about competing at a high level every day, not just on Saturday. How do you get better for Saturday? How are you going to be able to do it on Saturday if you're not doing it every day in practice?
Right.
I think that's the philosophy they took. It's the philosophy that I knew at Midland Lee, and that's why it fits so well.
Speaking of Coach Kough, I mean, what an impact he had at the University of Miami. You hear great stories like the one you just had, putting Ed Ogeron on his ass.
Yeah.
How was Coach Kough as a coach? Because we're on the outside. We hear all these, stories about him, but we rarely get to speak with a student, that played under him.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's the difference between like a coach and a teacher. And I think the teacher, I don't know, man. Coach Kough loved every one of his students, every one of his players as a teacher. As a coach, he was there every day. He's the guy that makes it fun, right? And it's because these are long seasons, man. We're playing 10, 12 games in a season. How many games they're playing now? 13, 14 games in a season?
Yeah.
It's long. It's a long season. So you get to week 8, man, you start to lose a little bit of interest. But he had a way of engaging with guys, and usually by insults and belittling people and like jabbing, verbal jabs. Like he had a way of getting under your skin to where you're engaged the entire season.
Right.
And I think that's a unique quality to find someone that had already been there for, I mean, how long Kough was there? 200 years. So he had already been there 100 years when I got there. But he still had that enthusiasm. He still had that attitude. And no one was more into football or emotionally engaged with the game than Arthur Francis Kough. And it was contagious. And I think what I'm most proud of Coach Kough doing is that, University of Miami was never known for its offensive line. And you can go back. There's great players. Leon Searcy was a great one, right? Greg Riccozzi, right? You'll go back in the day, Jim Otto, right? Yeah. But as units, right, you're usually playing with a guy that's, I remember my freshman year, we were playing with a tight end that became a tackle in week 8. Carlos Etheridge was a tight end at the beginning of the season. And at the end of the season against Alabama, he's playing right tackle. So you never really had a complete unit. But what I'm most happy and proud about Coach Kough is that when he had that moment in 2000, 2001, 2002, where he had the pieces, he assembled some of the best offensive lines in the history of the game.
Yeah.
Right? When he had those pieces. So he had a plan in his mind. He knew what football was supposed to look like before he even had the pieces, if that makes sense. So I think, coaches, coach under duress, right? That's hard to do, but coach when it's perfect, right? When you do have all the pieces, right? And see what happens, and to be able to manage personalities during that perfect moment. I think that's as good of a tribute to Coach Kough as there is. That he was able to, when the time came, when he had all the pieces, he was able to put together some of the best offensive lines the game's ever seen.
And you know what astounds me about Coach Kough is that when he was coaching and evaluating players, there were no recruiting services. He had to handpick players himself.
Yeah.
Find out about them. I mean, Casey Jones out of Midland, Texas. Okay.
Who knows, man? I don't know. I mean, I know the game has changed quite a bit, and I think that's all part of it, right? I think that's not just a part of it; it's half of it now, right? I think what you do in the off season is just as important as what you do during the season nowadays. And as far as his expertise in recruiting, he, like I said, he knew what an offensive lineman was supposed to look like. He knew what personalities he wanted. Like a center is a type, right? A guard is a type of person. A left tackle is a type of person. And so that's what he looked out. I think just as much as looking for athleticism and, measurables, he was looking for personality types to put in that room.
Yeah. No, 100%, man. That's very key. I liked how you stated that a lot. KC.
Yeah.
We spoke about a lot of, first-year head coaches in the sense of, the errors they make at first, trying to adjust. It's first-year head coaches. That's why, they're new to the game of football, new to being the head coach of a football team. They're going to make mistakes.
It ain't easy.
It's easier to be on the stands and critiquing them.
Yeah, it's easy. You know what? It's always been easy to tear stuff down than build stuff up, right? So it takes years to build something. It takes a day to tear it down.
How would you assess Coach Manny Diaz so far? As first-year head coach, completed his first year, now entering his third year.
Mm-hmm.
How would you assess his tenure at the University of Miami?
I think Manny's got a talent for getting people excited about the program, getting people to buy in, recruiting, and I think he's found a niche in the transfer portal. I mean, you got DeAndre King if there's ever that's a grand slam, getting that guy and getting that guy to come back for a second year. So I think those are all positives in his enthusiasm that he brings. Then I think also is, like I stated before, first-time head coaches always struggle, and I think one measure is at Miami, you got to beat the teams you're expected to beat, right? In his first year, he did not do that, right? You get beat by Florida International University, Butch Davis, right? That should never happen. That should never happen at the University of Miami. And then this year, you give up 500 yards rushing against North Carolina. That should never happen, right? And I don't think either of those things are based on players not showing up, or I think it's players not being prepared and players not being engaged, and that falls on the head coach.
Yeah.
Right. And the entire coaching staff. But then also you look at what talent he's bringing in, and I think they did make. I think he made huge steps in his second year. I think everybody was. I covered through Gino Toretta National Radio. I covered that Louisville team a couple years ago against Clemson, and they're a great team. They're not a great team. They're a good team, right? Jeff Satterfield is a good, very, very good coach, right? Going into that game, that's a primetime game. I don't know if anybody really knew what to expect. Miami handled their business. They looked great. I think that was a big step forward. I think that North Carolina State game this last year, they were in a dogfight, right? And you can say it's North Carolina State. Man, that's a good team as well. And they were in a dogfight in a big game, and they saw it through. And then I think going to Virginia Tech, going to Blacksburg, which, hey, man, I didn't do very good in Blacksburg myself. That's a tough place to play. He finds a way shorthanded with guys out on COVID protocol to win that game. So I think there's a lot of positives, right? But I think the next step for Manny is to win those games that he's expected to win, and also keep these guys engaged. I mean, that's the FIU and the North Carolina State game last year. Those are black marks on his coaching career. Yeah. And those are things that he should never forget. And those are things he should be held accountable for. But I think there are more positives than negatives. And I think going into this year, I'm sure excited. I think you didn't end the year the way you wanted to end it, but I think you got a lot of reason to be excited. I think you got an offensive system now that is exciting, that I think guys are excited to play for. And I think you have an offensive line that's, finally showing up. There were games the last 3 or 4 years that I didn't even know if we had an offensive line, man. It was, and I say this with love in my heart, man, because I know it's not easy, but it's, you got to have, and I think these guys are figuring it out now. There's a few components that University of Miami lacked on the field, especially on that offensive ball. One was a leader, and I think De'Aaron King fills that role very, very well. I think guys look up to him. I think guys respond to him and elevate their play when he's on the field. Also, you got to have a system that's maximizes your players on the field. And what's Miami have that what does South Florida have that everybody wants is speed. And I think that offensive system maximizes that speed and puts players in position to be successful. And then I think also nothing gets done. You look at that Super Bowl, nothing gets done without an offensive line. You got to have some consistency in that offensive line. I think they have a young group that's most of those guys are coming back, and I think experience for the offensive line is a really key component to success.
Yeah, no, I think you hit it, right in the nail. Starts with your quarterback, it's your leader. Derek is a college football playmaker. Your offensive line, that's your backbone. You can't have Derek King scrambling.
And playmakers, man. And you got playmakers. Man, Miami's always got playmakers, man. You just got to get those guys in position to make plays, right? And keep those guys engaged, keep them happy, and throw that ball around, man. And have fun. I think, there's been times at University of Miami where you look on that field and through body language and through performance, I would guess that these guys aren't having much fun. And that's not what University of Miami football is all about. It's about having fun, man. The best way of having fun is being prepared and whooping people's asses.
KC, what steps do you think this offensive line unit needs to take moving forward? Because I know, like you stated, there's been times in the past where it's been literally hideous, where we don't have an offensive line unit. Yeah. They made a huge jump this past season. I think they could only gotten better from 2019. In my opinion, but what else do you need to see from them moving forward into next season?
I think one thing, like I mentioned, is playing together. You're asking 5 guys that all before they showed up at University of Miami, they didn't know each other, and you're asking these guys to work at a high level and communicate at a high level instantly, right? And it's pretty hard to do, right? And I think through more experience, more game time, more plays together, I think that happens. And I think these guys, I think if I learned anything from the bunch of 2001, so Sherko and Romberg and Bibla, McKinney, those guys, is that in order to be able to communicate on the field, you got to be able to communicate off the field. And those guys, like Coach Kough he's the mad scientist in that lab. He created that offensive line to be able to do just that.
Right.
Those guys that had personalities that were engaging and cohesive with each other, that not only were they a unit on the field, they were a unit off the field. And so I would encourage those guys to find a way to connect with each other and get to know each other and be good friends to each other, because at the end of the day, man, it's a short time that you spend at the University of Miami, but those guys that you play with, that you fight with, are going to be your friends for your entire life. So I would tell those guys to start now and start being good friends to each other.
Very well said. KC, as a former player, you lived through a lot of great times. You had success, as a player yourself. Do you like where the program is headed? And what steps do you think the program needs to take in order to get back to winning football games again? And it doesn't have to be national title. I think just consistently winning the games you're supposed to.
Yeah, I think that's a good start, right? And I think that's how you build success, right? I think because these kids today, they're no dummies, man. They're not like Casey Jones just showing up like went behind the years in 1992. Like, hey guys, I'm here to play football. They have a lot of they're savvy by the time that they get to that level. They know what's going on. They know if a coach is not having success, how long is that coach going to be there? What are their chances of going through a transition and getting to the NFL? I think kids look at that stuff now, whereas before it was a little bit more naive and just like, hey, just give me a shot.
Right.
I think you got to win those games that you're expected to win, and I think you got to consistently compete for an ACC championship. And now we're going on how many years? 16 years? Are we on 16 years in the ACC with?
Yeah.
You've been to the championship one game. You got routed. I think you have to, if you're serious about having a tier one competitive football program at the University of Miami, you have to find a way to compete and win an ACC championship on a consistent basis. That's it. You have to. That has to be the standard. Otherwise, you're just kidding. You're kidding yourself, right? And you're pretending. And I feel that I think Manny took a big step forward last year, and I think he shares that same expectation that I do and other former players have of that program. That if you're not competing for a league title and you're in a conversation for a playoff berth in a national championship, then you're just pretending to play football.
No, I wholeheartedly agree. And, hopefully we can get the ball rolling next season. And with that being said, next season's not going to be easy. First game of the year, we play the reigning national champions. Yeah. I can just see an evil smile from Nick Saban as I say that.
Yeah.
KC,
yep.
If you were talking right now in front of the present Miami Hurricanes football team before they take on the Alabama Crimson Tide, what will you tell those young men?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's pretty simple. This is the opportunity. This is the game, the situation that you came to the University of Miami to take advantage of, right? This is why you came to the University of Miami, is to compete at the very highest level. And if you're not here to compete at the highest level, you're in the wrong room. I would say this too, is the whole world is watching, and this is your opportunity to shock the entire world, right? And I don't know where the expectation lies going into that game with those players, but they should have the expectation to come out winners from that game. And also, I would say this, I'd say this before any game. I think this is, kind of the spirit of what I discovered in football, is that the guys that you line up with, the guys that you practice and sweat and bleed and cuss and fight and you give everything for at practice and on the field, those guys are going to be in your life for the entirety of the rest of your life. I still have friends from college. I still have friends from high school. I still have friends from the NFL that I'll always love, that are like brothers to me. And it's up to you on how you're going to frame your experience going forward, whether that's going to be a positive or a negative one. And it's all within your control. And it's all about your enthusiasm and your effort and your going forward in that game. And that's not only just for the Alabama game, that's for every game. So how do you want to remember your days, your opportunities, your greatest experience at the University of Miami? Or do you want to remember those as a negative experience or a positive experience? It's all up to you.
Love it, man. That gave me goosebumps, KC. No, that was great stuff. Yeah. KC, before I let you go, man, do you still talk to Mario? I mean, he's all the way in Eugene, Oregon.
Yeah, man. So I've been fortunate enough. So I mentioned Sherko before, and Freddie Capshaw. When I moved back to Miami from Del Rey in, I think it was 2011, I moved down the street from Sherko. So I became very good friends with Sherko Haji Razuli. And he's still a great friend of me today. And through him, he introduced me to Freddie Capshaw. Long story short, these guys are out in Portland, Oregon, or Oregon City, Oregon. and they run a tire business. It's an affiliate of TGI, which is Joaquin Gonzalez's tire company
Okay,
in
very cool.
Miami. And so I go out there every year and I hang out with those guys, and we go to an Oregon Ducks game.
Oh, very cool.
And we get to hang out with Mario, and we get like the tour of the Death Star over there. And that Phil Knight, man, he's got lots of money out there.
Yeah, I know. He's got a lot of money.
Yeah.
I'm glad Mario's doing well.
Dude, he's doing great, and he's earned everything he's got out there, and he's the perfect guy for that job. I think it's a lot of, that's a lot of pressure out there, but I think he's the right guy for it. And he's the guy I think that can, from Eugene, Oregon, this place where not too many people are learning more and more about it. He can pick up the phone and he can call anybody. People will take Mario. They pay attention to Mario Cristobal when he calls, and I think because of that, and because of his he's a genuine person that loves the game, that loves his players. He's going to have success. He's going to find his way back in that college football playoff before too long.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, NFL teams are noticing as well. Spoke to a gentleman, high ranking with the Arizona Cardinals.
Yeah.
He said Mario Cristobal was on our radar. This was before they hired Kingsbury. So
how could he not? How could he not be? How could he not be? And I think, when it boils down to it, it's another level. You don't have to put up in the pros. You don't have to put up with recruiting, but you do have to put up with it's even more of a money game at that level. But Mario, he's had success on the college level. I think he would surely have success on the pro level as well.
100% agree. KC, thank you for your time. You are the true definition of a Miami Hurricane.
Thanks, man. I really appreciate that, man. Y'all stay safe out there and always go Canes.
Go Canes. Take care, guys. Have a great night.